party? Okay, we've got four.
Yes.
That was my generation. All right, maybe before. It used to be a book. Every time I tell my grandmother, she'd say, you do something, I'd say, I can't ever do it.
You will be riding on one of the first railroads into Chattanooga today. This line was completed in 1859 by the East Tennessee and Georgia Railroad. The ET&G would merge with a number of other railroads over time to eventually become the famous Southern Railway in 1894. The Southern would continue to use this 3-mile stretch of track until they abandoned it in the 1950s for reasons I'll explain later in our journey. They built a new line to the north, which you can see to the right of the train now. Up on that embankment, that line is still used today by the Southern Railway successor, the Norfolk Southern Corporation. Then, of course, after the Southern Railway did abandon the line, they would donate the 3 miles to us here at the museum, which is what we still run on to this day. Now just a bit about the coaches you're riding in today. Those of you with a red wristband are in coach 857, a lightweight coach built in 1947 by the Budd Company for the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad. Those of you with a green or yellow wristband are in coaches 661 and 907 respectively, both built in 1947 by the American Car and Foundry, or ACF, for the Central of Georgia Railroad. They were used on a passenger train named the Nancy Hanks II, which ran between Savannah and Atlanta, Georgia. Those of you with a blue wristband are in coach 906, built in 1924 by the Pullman Company for the Central of Georgia Railroad, used on passenger trains called the Man o' War and Seminole. And lastly, those of you with a blue or pink wristband are in coach 390, built in 1947 by American Car and Foundry for the Central of Georgia Railroad, also used on that passenger train, the Nancy Hanks II. If you look to the left of our train according to our direction of travel, you'll see a gravel road. That gravel road is the roadbed for the original 1859 right-of-way. The line was elevated to its current height and position in the first decade of the 20th century by the Southern Railway due to numerous occasions of flooding. Chattanooga used to be extremely prone to flooding before the construction of the Chickamauga Dam during the Great Depression. As an example of this flooding, to the left of our train, in just a moment you'll see a sign. Next to that sign is a tree with a yellow line painted on it. That yellow line represents the high water mark from the Great Flood of 1867. At 9 feet above the track, it will explain why this line had to be elevated. We're now crossing our first bridge over South Chickamauga Creek. In the water below, you may spot some turtles, river otters, or geese. To the left, there is a set of stone piers. Those stone piers mark the site of the original bridge. On top of those stone piers would have been a wooden decking that the rails would have run on. The original bridge in that location was made entirely of stone and was washed away in a flood in 1861. Unfortunately, an engineer did not see that bridge had washed away in time, and well, let's just say he and his train went for a swim. And of course, the bridge span we currently just crossed over was built for the Southern Railway in 1912, 109 years ago. We're about to cross our second bridge over the Western and Atlantic Railroad. This line you'll see below us here was the original line into Chattanooga, being completed by the state of Georgia in 1850. That line runs from Atlanta to Chattanooga and is still owned by the state of Georgia today. They currently lease it out to CSX. That line is also home to a very famous story from the Civil War. Some of you may have heard of it, and that would be the Great Locomotive Chase. For those of you that have not heard of it, the Great Locomotive Chase is the story of Union spy James Andrews and 23 others known as Andrews Raiders. They disguised themselves as civilians and made their way to Big Shanty, Georgia, which is today Kennesaw, Georgia, and stole a locomotive named General while it was on a fuel, water, and mill stop. They planned to race the General all the way north to Chattanooga while burning bridges and destroying track and telegraph wires along the way in an effort to sever the Cushing Confederate supply artery. They were pursued by the General's conductor, William Fuller, and a locomotive he commandeered named the Texas. The Texas was facing south, so for the duration of the chase, he had to run that locomotive in reverse. The General ran out of fuel just north of Ringgold, Georgia. about 18 miles down the track from Chattanooga. All the men were caught. 8 of them, including Andrews himself, were unfortunately hung in Atlanta. They are today buried at the Chattanooga National Cemetery around a broad replica of the General just a few miles from her current location. The rest of the men either escaped prison or were exchanged for Confederate prisoners. Andrews was the very first to ever receive the Medal of Honor, but Andrews himself did not, as he was a civilian and not eligible. If you'd like to know more on the topic, there are many books and films based on the event, including Buster Keaton's silent film The General, and one of Walt Disney's lesser-known films from the 1950s, also titled The Great Locomotive Chase. Both locomotives involved in that chase are still preserved today. The Texas is on display at the Atlanta History Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the General is on display at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History in Kennesaw, Georgia. Originally, this road you'll see here would have tunneled underneath the railroad, hence the name. When the Southern Railway abandoned the sign in the 50s, the roof of the tunnel was opened up to avoid maintenance costs. When the land was donated to us, we put a bridge over that gap, so today we have a tunnel boulevard without a tunnel. It's also the only place we can legally run over cars. I'll point out some of my favorite trees along the route. There's this one, and this one. Oh, and this one here with the leaves on it.
That was a joke. That was a joke.
We're not making our climb up Missionary Ridge, but rather than travel over it, we're going to travel through it. Through the Missionary Ridge Tunnel, also known as the Whiteside Tunnel. This tunnel is 986 feet long, about the length of 3 football fields. It was completed in 1858, dedicated in 1859, and was excavated entirely by pick and shovel, as dynamite was not invented until 1867. So I guess you could say it went off without a bang. This tunnel was excavated from both ends of the ridge, meeting in the middle. When both portals did meet in the middle, they were only off center from one another by 3 inches. During World War II, this tunnel would see as many as 70 trains a day. This tunnel is the reason that this line was eventually abandoned. After World War II, the railway's equipment was becoming too large to fit with the pre-Civil War era tunnel. Also, the time the tunnel was single track, while the rest of the lines was double track, creating a major bottleneck, so that new line was built to the north that bypasses the ridge altogether. If you have a flashlight app on your cell phones, I do encourage you to have those out at this time to shine them out the windows and illuminate the tunnel walls as we pass through so you can view them. While in the tunnel, you may notice we are very close to the tunnel walls, and there is indeed at times less than 1 foot of clearance between us and those walls. On January 14, 1886, a freight train passing through this tunnel was carrying a narrow gauge locomotive on a flat car. They did not measure the height before passing through the tunnel. The stack of that locomotive did strike the tunnel at the ceiling, causing a partial collapse midway through. Luckily, crews were able to have the tunnel cleared out and reopened in just 7 days. There were no fatalities or even injuries in that accident. Passenger trains still continued as scheduled, though. The railroads would have passengers disembark once the trains approached the tunnel. They would then walk over the ridge and board another train waiting on the other side. In 1888, from a particularly wet spring, there was another collapse about midway through this tunnel, so the railroad decided to go through it and put in brick lining through most of the tunnel, about 3 to 4 feet thick, to support the ridge above, and that was the last known cave-in that took place in this tunnel, 1888. We're now on the west side of Missionary Ridge. You can imagine traveling on a Southern Railway passenger train in the early 20th century, as this is how you would have approached downtown Chattanooga. Right through that tunnel there, with your final destination being Terminal Station, which has today been converted into the Chattanooga Choo Choo Hotel. Of course, passenger trains back then would have consisted of more than just passenger coaches. For example, there might have been a baggage car, an RPO car, sleeping car, lounge car, on some trains even a dome car or an observation car. Then on most trains was my favorite, the dining car, which I believe is just about everybody's favorite. We've almost reached the end of the 3 miles of track donated by the Southern Railway, so in another 5 minutes or so, we're going to be coming to a stop at our East Chattanooga Depot. Once there, you have the option of either staying on board the train for the layover, or joining me as we do a demonstration of our turntable as we spin the locomotive around 180 degrees for the return trip to Grand Junction. I do highly encourage everyone to join me for this demonstration, as this is one of the only places left in the world where you can still see what's about to take place. So if you stay on board, you're going to be missing quite a bit of the experience we do offer. If anyone needs to use the restroom while we're here at East Chattanooga, there will be a restroom available in the depot right next to the train on the right side. Should be fairly easy to spot. It is the only building located on that side of the train, so if you need to use the restroom, it will be located right inside of that gray painted building. Please do remain seated once we come to a complete stop. We'll be unloading the train by wristband color, so please wait until your wristband color is called. The exit will of course be the same place we boarded the train from. Once you do exit the train, take a left turn down the stairway or continue forward for the ramp, and then follow the pathway down to the turntable. After we have everyone gathered around the turntable, we will begin the demonstration. Before we get there, I am required to state per order of the Hamilton County Department of Health, while at the turntable, please keep a 6-foot distance from those other parties around you. And when returning to the train, please return to the same car and seat you're in at this time. So please take note of which car you're riding in. It should correspond to your wristband color. And depending on the car, if you look above the windows or up on the baggage rack, you will find your seat numbers. We will need you to return to those same seats. Of course, I do apologize for those of you that are having to walk a longer distance throughout the train. One of the Hamilton County Health Department's rules for us to be allowed to operate right now is that we're not allowed to use the built-in stairways on the cars themselves. They said we have to load everybody on board our ramps, so that does mean we can only load and unload from one location on the train. Now, when this museum was first founded in 1961, the Southern Railway originally only donated 1.5 miles of track, and that track began right here in East Chattanooga. So if you were to visit the museum in the first 2 decades of our operation, this is where you would have come to get on the trains. You would have ridden 1.5 miles to the other side of the tunnel and then reversed back. In the 80s, the Southern Railway did donate another 1.5 miles for a total of 3 miles overall. That also allowed us to connect to the Grand Junction side. We then converted Grand Junction to the main museum campus and converted this side of the property into what I like to call the industrial side. We'll begin with green. Those of you with a green wristband can head to the exit at this time. Welcome to East Chattanooga, everyone. As you can see here, we have reached the end of the line, quite literally. So we're going to pull the locomotive onto this turntable and spin it around 180 degrees for the return trip to Grand Junction. This turntable you're looking at was constructed in 1916 by the American Bridge and Iron Company and was used by the Central of Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia at their locomotive back shops. That is up until 1925 when they sold it to a branch line based out of Cedartown, Georgia. In Cedartown, it was used in a very similar fashion to how we're using it here today. We acquired it in the 1980s, moved it to this location, and we've been using it here ever since. This table is 80 feet long, and it weighs in at 80 tons. Keep in mind, the average school bus only weighs about 6 or 7 tons. But that locomotive right there, it weighs in at 125 tons. So when it's on the table here, the overall weight between the two will be sitting just over 200 tons. So it may surprise you to know that this table was originally turned by hand. It was an Armstrong table. There would have been poles extending off each end, and it would have taken 4 people to push those poles to spin the table around. Do we have any volunteers? We're going to need 4. We got 1, 2, 3, and I'm just kidding. We don't do it that way anymore. Now say we just use a small 25 horsepower motor under the operator shed here that either myself or our conductor Bo will be operating. Now the way we're able to turn it by motor still is by making sure the table is balanced with just 25 horsepower. And once we get the locomotive balanced here in the center of the table, if you keep an eye on the far end of the table down there, you will see it drop by just a few inches. When it drops, we know the table is balanced. So when it drops, he stops. The locomotive pulling our train today is a very special locomotive for us here at the museum, and that it is a local locomotive, meaning it has lived its entire life running mostly out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Very rare you can say that about a locomotive, because that locomotive was built for the Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia Railroad, which is a local railroad based out of Chattanooga running through North Georgia and down to Gadsden, Alabama. Very rare that we get one preserved and preservation for a museum within the city that locomotive came from. This locomotive is also very special to have on the Missionary Ridge Local, considering the fact that this locomotive is almost exclusively used on our local trips. It's very rare that we use it for our short 1-hour ride. Now, this locomotive was built in 1968 by General Motors Electromotive Division for the Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia Railroad, commonly known as the PAG. It is a GP38, a model GP38. The GP meaning general purpose. This locomotive was designed for any service, freight, passenger, and switching service horsepower. And it produces 2,000 horsepower. And the 38, the name is just named the series number within that series, the GP series locomotive, starting at GP7, going all the way up to most recently, referred to as a diesel locomotive. diesel motor turning a generator. That generator produces electricity, and that electricity is fed down to the traction motor that's sitting on each axle of the locomotive. And it's those traction motors that are actually propelling the engine, hence the term diesel electric. You can think of it as a hybrid of sorts. And these locomotives have always made that way, and that is the way they are still made today. Whether it's going to Pacific CSX or Union Pacific, they're all diesel electric. The major difference between the locomotives built in 1968 and the ones being made today is that today's modern engines, of course, have computer systems in them, as well as produce much more power and are much more fuel efficient. If you look up in the cab, now we've got the locomotive turn around, you'll see our engineer, Bill. He's responsible for operating this locomotive and getting it steer and back safely today, so we're going to go ahead and make him a wave or a law. It does take a lot of skill to be an engineer, and it has taken many years of classroom time and observation hours to be able to get certified as an engineer. In fact, one of the best examples I can think of is we have a gentleman who started volunteering here when he was 14, eventually made his way up to part-time staff full that day, but he did not eventually get qualified as an engineer until he was 25. It takes that long to work your way up to the ranks. And you've got to go from regular, local, fireman, and then engineer. A lot of you have probably seen our equipment before and don't even realize it. We are very often involved in music video and film productions. For example, we have worked with both Johnny Cash and Josh Turner on music videos filmed involving our equipment, and films such as October Sky with Jake Gyllenhaal and Laura Dern, Leatherhead with George Clooney, Water for Elephants with Robert Pattinson and Reese Witherspoon, and most recently 42 with Chadwick Boseman and Harrison Ford. The last three of those movies I mentioned actually being partially filmed on property here. And of course, we're also very frequently involved in documentary and children's shows filming episodes as well. As you probably noticed here, our train still sits on track 1, but we've lined the locomotive up for track 2. That is so we can do a runaround. What that means is the locomotive is going to go past our train and then through a switch. It will then reverse through the switch, back into track 1, took up to the opposite end of the train. So what was the front is now the back, and vice versa. Now that we have completed turning the locomotive around, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to come up and ask me. I'll be standing right over here at the rear of our train, so come see me there. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, you can start making your way back to the train at this time. Please make sure you do return to the same car and seat you rode in on the way over. Don't forget, we do have a restroom available in the depot there next to the train. And like I said, if you have questions, come see me. Otherwise, I will see you back on board. In just a few minutes, we'll be arriving back at Grand Junction Station. We do thank everyone for riding with us today at the Tennessee Valley Road Museum and hope you did enjoy your excursion. If you do choose to visit with us again in the future, we do offer many other longer trips that you can choose from, ranging from 1 to 9 hours each. Trips include our Dinner on the Diner, the Chickamauga Turn, the Somerville Steam Special, as well as our holiday-themed trips such as the Halloween Erie Express and the North Pole Limited, special events such as Founders Day and the upcoming Day Out with Thomas, and lastly our scenic trips out of Etowah, Tennessee on Hiwassee River Rail Adventures. If you like the Missionary Ridge Local in particular, you do have up to 30 days from today to upgrade your ticket from today to an annual pass. That does get you unlimited rides on the Missionary Ridge Local for a full year, discounts on some of the longer rides, discounts in the gift shop Family Deli, and a subscription to our quarterly newsletter, the Smoke and Cinders magazine. We do thank you for your patience and understanding as we implement CDC, FRA, TSA, and Hamilton County Health Department guidelines to ensure your safety on board. Once again, please remain seated. Once we come to a complete stop, we'll be unloading the train by wristband color, so please wait until your wristband color is called. The exit will be the same place we boarded the train from again, as I've said. If you'd like to see the locomotive turn around for our next trip, it will be doing so using the Y, a triangular-shaped junction of tracks surrounding Grand Junction Station, essentially doing a 3-point turn. If you go to the front side of the station, that is a great area to watch that take place from. Also, if you follow the locomotive to the opposite end of the train, you'll be able to watch the locomotive recouple to the train for the next trip. Now please make sure you help keep the area around your seats clean. It does take a lot to keep these trains clean, and a clean train is a happy crew. Please make sure you don't forget any personal items such as any hats, glasses, keys, wallets, purses, cell phones, husbands, wives, and kids. If you enjoyed your trip today, my name is Zach with an H, but if you do not enjoy it, in that case, my name is Zach with a K.